Thanks, Sean. Good to be back. Great state of Maryland. First of all, Jake, stand up, my friend. Stand up. Go ahead, stand. Yeah, you. Stand up. Everybody see Jake back there? You fall asleep, you got to answer to him. Go ahead, sit back down. Or ask me a hard question. He's going to take you downstairs. It's going to be a wrestling match later. I don't know. Last talk, I put half of them asleep. I'm going to see if I can do better and get 3/4 of you to fall asleep in the second talk. So I don't know what's wrong with me. I've gotten a lot milder and meeker since I moved to Kentucky, so I guess everybody's napping on me. So we're going to talk to you about manure use in grain production systems. Yes, I hit record. My good friend, Dr. Edwin Ritchie, sitting up here in the front row. He goes on next. This is first part of a 3-part series. And then tomorrow, Jordan Shockley will be talking about the economic side of it. Really great deal. I'll touch on it just for a second at the very end to kind of whet your appetites for the next talks. And then we start talking about it when we're getting our talks together about 5 minutes ago. And that was a joke. I'll tell you when it's a joke. You can just laugh at that point. And when it said, some of this, it's like, man, these guys are doing things differently up here in the Chesapeake Bay. Of course, I spent a lot of time here. But hopefully it's still applicable, maybe as a refresher on some things of why we do things the way we do. And at some points I'll reference kind of how we do things in other parts of the world as well. So I'll jump right into it. The 4 R's of the number 2. So we're talking about number 2, right? Poultry litter. And the 4 R's is the industry standard for fertilizer. The right rate, right timing, right place, right source. So I tried to structure my talk to capture those 4 R's, but for manure. And one thing that we've got to think about, though, is we always talk about the R's, right? The rate, the timing, the placement, the source. But the 4 R's has this other component, the performance objectives, because there are multiple rights. There's more than one right rate. Do you want maximum yield? Do you want maximum profitability per acre? Do you want to maximize your time efficiency? How about environmental concerns? And so the right changes depending on the performance objective, and most times we're balancing. We could be more profitable if we slowed down, maybe, but we go fast for other reasons. Or maybe, we could put on a lower rate to protect the environment, but we're going to lose money. So it's a lose-lose situation if you're a pessimist like me, or a win-win if you're balancing out these things. So a lot of these are trade-offs that we're going to be covering. I'm going to give you the last slide first so that hopefully you can get a nice solid 50 minutes of sleep in over the rest of the program. So, that was a joke. Oh no, you all took me seriously. You're actually going to sleep for the next 50 minutes. The right rate. So, lower rate might provide higher return, economic return on nitrogen investment. Lower rate with poultry litter. And again, here we're at a much lower rate than we were even when I started 10 years ago. I mean, I remember the times when we were trying to get our total nitrogen value out of that litter without any extra fertilizer. We don't do that anymore. All right? But lowering that rate has had some effects on our management that we might not be accounting for. Had a good question last time about our carryover numbers from nitrogen for poultry litter for years 2 and 3. So we'll get into that. And of course, the phosphorus runoff risk. Timing. Now, no one fall applies poultry litter here, right? We don't fall apply poultry litter anymore. Correct? All right. It all goes down on the fall in Kentucky. And we're going to get into why and how much money you lose when you do that. And so maybe that part of the talk will be a part where you feel good about yourself. Kind of a little counseling session. Placement. Surface application has potential to lose nutrients. I heard this morning that Maryland's backing off the tillage rule. All right? So we know that we lose more nutrients when we put that manure on the surface, no question. But tillage loses soil, and everyone's all healthy soil now. How many NRCS people are here? I can't pick on NRCS again. You're really cutting half my jokes out of my repertoire when I can't pick on NRCS. No, but I mean, this truly is a lose-lose situation right now when we talk about poultry litter. Tillage tears up the soil, putting it on the surface loses nutrients. End of story. You can debate with me all day long, and all I'm going to say here is say I'm right, you're wrong. I debate like a 5-year-old. Source, we're still working on this for manure. Manure's manure, but I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the research we've done. Manure N is all about the nitrogen cycle. Tell a little story here, all right, just because stories are more fun than the rest of it. Anybody here from the last talk? Some people like to hear me speak twice, so I just want to make sure I can use all the same stupid jokes. So manure nitrogen, so we did some manure storage styles. I know everyone goes, man, Josh, don't show that picture. That looks terrible. Why you show that picture? No one does that. Come on. No one does that? No one does that? Now, we were doing a storage study out at the Y Research Center, covering these piles up. And I was going up, it was November, and I was going up to Pittsburgh for the soil science meetings. A friend of mine from Oklahoma flew in. Actually, I think we went out to Jenny's farm for a field day, and it was why he was here. We had a rental car, brand new Nissan Murano. We'd go out here, dark, rainy, tarps had blown off. I fired that guy in charge of the tarps. So if any of you have ever tried to walk across a mess like this, it's about impossible, right? And we're slipping and falling. I've got manure in every crack and crevice of my body. Clothes are saturated. We get all done, and my parents live up in Smyrna, like half hour from the Y, right? So I said, man, we can't get back in this rental car with our clothes on. Time to take our clothes off. So we took them off and bundled them up and threw them up on top of that car and tied them down and drove to Smyrna. I said, man, I hope Maryland State Police don't pull us over before we get home. This is going to be a tough one to explain. But yeah, so that's what we were doing here. So also, you know that big house there next to the Y? Who owns that big house? The Chef Boyardee people. They were having a wedding in their front yard while we were doing this study, and they called up my good friend Russ and asked him if they could get rid of that study. And they almost made us remove a study we had been working on for a year because it smelled so bad. But anyways. All right, manure nitrogen cycle. I'm going to talk about managing the manure nitrogen cycle because that's how we manage the value of manure. Most of the value of our manure is in the nitrogen, and so we got to manage the nitrogen cycle through the decisions we make to make it more valuable to us. I'm going to break it down to make the cycle a little bit easier. Most of your manure nitrogen, you got a big chunk that's organic in. You got urea that's pretty much considered inorganic or readily available. You've got some ammonium already in that poultry litter. You know that you smell that ammonia gas coming off of that ammonium. Very, very little nitrate in poultry litter. Good question came up in the last talk, so I'll cover it right now. We talk about controlling that urea conversion to ammonium. I'm going to talk about that. And people say, what about NBPT? Right, which is a urease inhibitor, doesn't work in poultry litter. I'll tell you why. NBT, so urease is the enzyme that allows urea to go to ammonium. It's a key and lock enzyme, and you already have urease present in poultry litter because of the wood chips. It's loaded with it, so it's too late to apply an inhibitor. So NBPT or any kind of urease inhibitor will not work in poultry litter because the urease has already attached to the urea molecule. It's too late. Something like dairy on a sand bedding, a liquid manure, okay. But with the poultry litter, it took us a while to figure that out. The NBPT will not work. So we apply this manure. We've got a big chunk of organic in, big chunk of urea. Urease is already in there. It starts to mineralize. Its first stop is ammonium. Goes to that ammonium. You can get immobilization, which is backwards, but we don't get too much of that with poultry litter. If you've got a lot of carbon out there, like say horse manure or something like that, you'll get that backwards nitrogen going into the organic that's not plant available, right? That's why they say compost horse manure first. A bunch of straw and stuff in it, but most of it's going this direction if it's warm enough. It's running to ammonium. And that ammonium pretty rapidly, if it's laying on the soil surface, can deprotonate, which means one of those hydrogen drops off of there and we got ammonia gas on the surface blowing off. So that's a loss pathway. Surface supply, poultry litter, you smell that ammonia gas coming off of there. And that ammonium also can pretty quickly go to nitrate. That's called nitrification. So this is basically what happens. We apply that manure, it starts going to ammonium and nitrate, and that's what's plant available, right? And if it's on the surface, we can get ammonia loss. And here the big concern is nitrate leaching. One of the interesting things, getting to move around and going out to Kentucky is denitrification is where they're worried because we have these fragipan soils, they stay wet in the winter, apply poultry litter in the winter, and you're getting a bunch of denitrification, basically as N2, N2O, but as a gas going off of that soil coming out of that soil. Denitrification out there is a big risk. It is here if our soils get saturated, but our soils tend to drain a lot better. And we don't get, you know, they have to be saturated and anaerobic for about 3 days for that denitrification to start to kick in. So we are going to try and manage our poultry litter to keep the nitrogen and ammonium and nitrate in the root zone. We don't want the nitrate to disappear. We want plant available nitrogen in the root zone because that's what our crop wants. So that's the nitrogen cycle. I'm going to keep coming back to it. Spreader calibration. So you can go with the tarp method. You can go with the pan method. I don't care how you do it as long as you're doing it. But then once you're doing it, then I care how you're doing it. It's never good enough for me. So you go out there, you start using tarps. You know, you spread across the tarp, calculate the area, weigh the litter that came off, get tons per acre. I'm going to say, that's great. I'm glad you started calibrating your litter spreader. Now I want you to use the pans. There's Edwin spreading litter over tarps in Kentucky, Stone Age. Well, he's from Tennessee, so it's like, I don't know, Neolithic. No, I'm picking on him. But, you know, so you can go across that tarp and weigh it, and that's a fine way to do it. But really, if you start laying out these pans, here we've got them 7 foot apart, what do you get? You get distribution. And with that distribution, you can get a better estimate of where your center should be if you're running that spreader. And that's important because we're farming on a fine edge here in the Chesapeake Bay. I mean, let's admit that. We're operating at higher nitrogen use efficiency because of some of the regulations and rules. We don't have the cushion, right? If we mess up, if we short ourselves. So uniformity of application becomes important because we don't want to have spotty, streaky areas in the field. We want to try and get a nice uniform application. So you set those pans out, they can be 10 foot apart, go across them 3 times, get your uniformity of that distribution so you know how to center up your equipment. This is what it looks like in practice. This is down in Dorchester County. And you know, you see some of them flip over and some of your litter misses, so do it a couple times. It's a messy business, and get yourself a good number before you start spreading. And you know, this number changes from year to year. People go, well, I calibrated my spreader 5 years ago. I've seen those numbers drift over time because that equipment wears out. So it's worth the effort. It's worth the effort. So determining the right rate and timing. And I say you've got to have a plan even if it's not a good one. I pick on a nutrient management plan. Everyone complains about it, right? And I just pick on it so you'll like me. And that was a joke. I know you're not going to like me. But, you know, so that nutrient management plan, I always said it's no better. The only thing it's going to do to stop runoff to the Chesapeake Bay is if you stack them all up along the shore, right? And keep the water in the fields. But that's really not true. The planning process makes us smarter, and a smarter farmer is a better farmer and a more economical farmer. So while all the paperwork requirements are a pain, going through that process, I think in general, has elevated our game in this region. I'm a big believer in that, in the educational component of going through the plan systematically and look at the economics of it. With manure, splitting might be even more important of splitting that nitrogen, and that's mostly what people do in this region, right? Everyone's seen this. This is time across the horizontal axis. The vertical axis is the percent of your nitrogen that you applied that's taken up by the corn. This is a corn growth curve right here about V4. We take off, rapid growth stage, the corn's just chugging along, right? But if we apply all that nitrogen, a big chunk of it up front, it's vulnerable for a long time, right? So you apply a portion, you know, half of your nitrogen, 25% of your nitrogen, and come in and side dress, right? You split that application. Well, what happens with poultry litter? Applying to a total nitrogen rate, so let's say I need 200 pounds of nitrogen for my corn crop. I'm going to put 200 pounds down with my litter. That is going to really run your phosphorus soil test up, and that's a big problem here. And then eventually you're not going to be able to apply litter because of the regulations. But really, even more so from an economic standpoint, I think you get more complete mineralization of your manure nitrogen with the lower rates that we use nowadays. Going to 2-3 tons per acre of poultry litter, you're putting down what? Somewhere between 60 and 100 pounds of plant available nitrogen, somewhere in there. And what you've done is, if I apply 6 tons of poultry litter, my bugs in the soil, that population explodes. But they got 6 tons of litter, and all organic nitrogen is not created equal. So they pick and choose what organic nitrogen they're going to start break down. Remember that nitrogen cycle. Taking and mineralizing that nitrogen over to the plant available form. 6 tons of litter, they're going for that nice, soft, tender meat. right? They got it easy. They're fat, dumb, and happy. And they never break down that tougher organic nitrogen molecule. Now, what do we do nowadays? 2-3 tons to the acre. I get the same bug population, but they're hungry. And they start chewing on that bone, right? And gnawing on it, trying to suck that marrow out of that organic nitrogen. And you convert a higher percentage of your nitrogen, which means per ton you applied, you're getting more dollar value if the biggest component of your litter value is nitrogen, which it is, right? So going down to that 2 ton per acre rate has made that litter actually worth more per ton. Got me? Does that make sense to everybody? Does anybody? Yeah, makes sense. It's worth more per ton the lower the rate I put out. So you got to find a happy balance to get the right amount of pre-plant out there and come in and side dress the rest. A little bit about the PSNT. Everybody here knows about the PSNT, and I know everyone in this room encourages use of the PSNT and uses it themselves, correct? I got beat up on this one last time. But the PSNT works. It actually, people are always shocked to hear this because we don't think about it. It's actually probably one of our better soil tests when we look at all the calibration data that was used to build it back in the 90s. Actually better than our phosphorus recommendations. It's trickier because it's nitrogen. How well it performs for you depends on the weather after you take the test and how many of you are really good at predicting the weather. That's what I thought. So it's tough. Nitrogen's tough, but the test itself works pretty well. Everyone knows how to use it here. Sample to 12 inches when the corn is 6 to 12 inches tall. Only works when you have a history of organic nitrogen. Doesn't work with inorganic fertilizer. I can show you a chart like the one I'm getting ready to show for all fields, 400 fields that only had inorganic fertilizer, no manure, no legumes. It doesn't work well. Because it's not just measuring soil nitrate and subtracting off, well, you got 100 pounds of nitrate per acre, so take that off your fertilizer. That's not how it works. It was designed through a series of empirical field, I'm getting all sciencey here, I don't even know what it means, so don't ask me. Empirical field experiments where they predicted future mineralization. So it's not saying you got 100 pounds per acre of nitrate, so take that off your fertilizer bill. It's saying over the rest of the growing season, if today your nitrate is this, tomorrow it'll be this, the next day it'll be this. That's how it works, and most people don't get that. That's actually when they developed in the 90s what they were doing. So they took all the data for all the states working on it, and they threw it into one chart right here. Okay, this is from the original paper, 1992. So this is Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, Vermont, a bunch of different states throughout the Northeast. They threw it all together. This is what's called a Kate-Nelson approach to finding critical level. Critical level is the point above which we don't need fertilizer, below which we do. We do it for phosphorus, for potassium, and this was for PSNT. And so you can pick where you put this line. You can picture if I move it up or down. Industry standard's about 0.93. Some people use 0.9. And so on the vertical axis here is relative yield. So this point right here is about 0.85. That means without nitrogen at side dress, so they put all these plots out there, took a soil sample, and then they had a plot with no nitrogen at side dress and a plot that had non-limiting nitrogen. It doesn't matter what the rate is as long as it's more than you need. And they divided the two to get relative yield. So this point got about 85% without nitrogen, right? So this plot that got nitrogen didn't. I'm bad at math. Got 100 bushels per acre, and this plot without nitrogen got 85 bushels per acre, right? So I got 85% of the yield that my check plot with nitrogen got. And so we plot all of these, 400 and it's in here somewhere, 400 and some points on here. And you've got 4 quadrants. This quadrant right down here, lower left, whoa, it works. This is where the test works. Below 25 parts per million, it correctly predicted that these points needed fertilizer nitrogen at side dress. And it works in this quadrant because it correctly predicted that above 25 parts per million, I didn't need to side dress. I had enough there for the rest of the growing season. This quadrant here, there's a couple dozen points, and right here there's a couple dozen points. It didn't work. These points said you need nitrogen, you did not need nitrogen. And here it said don't put any on, and you lost yield. And I had folks complain, they said, well, it's not, this was a legitimate complaint, it's not 100% accurate. So this is all good for 95% of the people in the world. Actually, it comes out to about 98% of the time it works. 98% of the people are happy. I'm one of the 2%, it stinks for me. And the only answer I have for you is sorry about your luck. It really stinks to be the 2%. I mean, it does. But what is it? Understand why. And this is better than soil test phosphorus. This is better than soil test potassium. None of them perform as good as nitrogen did, amazingly. But if I test 40, but I needed nitrogen, what happened? There's a couple things. Usually the sample was taken incorrectly. Didn't take it deep enough. Didn't take enough cores from that field. All right? Doesn't work if you don't do it right. Test 40 and I needed fertilizer. It rained more than the average of these 490-some site years. The climate didn't fall in the confidence interval. This is pretty robust. I mean, it's not like you got to have the exact same climate as these. I mean, this was 490 site years. It's on here somewhere. I don't know where it's at. 341 site years on this plot. It's a pretty robust model, but if after you take the sample you get a bunch of rain, you're going to leach some nitrogen and you're going to get higher yields than expected. Or what if it dries up? Dries up for 2 weeks, and what's this doing is predicting how much nitrate mineralizes over the rest of the microphone battery died. Over the rest of the growing, right? The battery died, was I right, or am I just going deaf? I had to check. Sometimes I think I'm talking in my head. But if it dries up, you don't get as much mineralization as average. Dries up, organic N locks in, and it stays there till the next time it rains, and so the test fails. We can't, but that only happens 2% of the time. Pretty doggone good test. If you're not confident in your fertility recommendations and you're using manure nitrogen, it's a good backstop. It was designed to never under-apply and always over-apply. The problem with this test is it encourages over-application of nitrogen. So then the second rule is stop and engage brain. You can use all the tests you want, but you got to put some common sense and field knowledge into this. I know what this field does. I know what the weather's been so far. I don't trust these results. And too often we just want to answer. We don't want to have to think about it. But that's just the reality of how farming works because we can't predict the weather. Can you guys hear me in the back? All right. Am I hurting you guys in the front? I'm going to go on to, this is going to upset people. I'm going to hurt your feelings. Plant tissue sampling. This is the exact same sites. Exact same sites. Good Kate Nelson relationship, bad Kate Nelson relationship. Good, bad. All right? What happened here? Plant tissue, V4, before I go out and side dress, does not work for nitrogen. You can argue with me all day long. Remember how I told you I argue like a 5-year-old? I'm right, you're wrong. That's all I got to say. I've got the data. Show me your data. This is, and this has always been true. Why? There's a reason. And I think if you think about the reason, you'll understand why tissue doesn't work early. I'm not talking about late. I'm talking early. What's getting ready to happen at V6? You can hear that corn growing. In the morning, it's different than the afternoon. The uptake is so fast that you've got carbon built up in the plant material that's diluting the sample. It scatters the data to the 4 winds, and it's not dependable early in the season as a nitrogen predictor. Enough on that. Managing manure nitrogen use efficiency. This is old data. Everyone in the room should have seen me talk about this at some point, but I'm going to revisit it because I want to explain something a little different on it, especially now that our good friends at MDA, I'm going to pick on you, they're going to let you till again. We're going to ruin the Chesapeake Bay. But if they make you stop tilling, we're going to ruin the Chesapeake Bay. So it's a lose-lose. It's a lose-lose. So I encourage you to use common sense. So we went out there and we did some chisel disc at the Y Research Center. We did turbo till. We did zone till. Had it on one field for 3 years, started in 2006 with the soil test was 65 FIV, basically. One field, 4 tillage treatments, same manure rate every year, same soil test P at the beginning of the study and at the end. Same hydrology and slope, very different results. No till, this is phosphorus loss in 2006 over the whole year. Phosphorus loss. No till, turbo till, strip till, conventional till. The more I tilled, the less the phosphorus ran off. It's the way it worked. Sediment loss wasn't a real concern in these gently sloping silt loam fields at the Y Research Center. That's what we're talking about on the Delmarva. I go to Frederick County, I go to the valley in Virginia, erosion becomes a concern. It's trade-offs. It's hard to come up with a good solution in this situation, but understand why this happened. This is no-till, turbo-till, strip-till, chisel plow. This is the individual phosphorus concentrations in each runoff event in 2006. The first runoff event in this year took 2 inches of rain to get runoff from this field. Every rainfall event doesn't run off. We all know that, right? You've seen it rain and water's not running down the ditch. All right? But what happened in 2006 was it was pretty dry in the spring. It was 45 days. This is impressive. 45 days after we applied the manure without a measurable runoff event. And it just didn't rain. So the litter was like virgin fresh litter that had never been rained on. 45 days after application, the first rainfall we get, bad luck, 2 inches. I think it was 2 1/4 inches. And we see the trend. Litter on the surface and no-till sitting right there to dissolve the pea right out of it and run off as a dissolved form, what we call incidental transfer. The more we tilled, the less we saw that in those first 2 events. If you look at every other year of this study, we had a bunch of little rainfall events before that first 2-incher, and they all looked just like the conventional till. Just didn't matter how I tilled it, they all had the same runoff pea. But when we look at it as a whole and lump all 3 years together, and other states have done this research, everyone's beat this one to death, when we lump it all together over 3 years, that one bad event carries the load. And I think we know this in ag. Everyone talks about like, well, every single day we're polluting the Chesapeake Bay. We're polluting the Chesapeake Bay once out of 3 years when we have rain at the wrong time. So, if I'm on a coastal plain, relatively flat soil, managing poultry litter, and my performance objective in the 4 R's is water quality, yes, I still believe some sort of tillage, whatever it is that puts litter in contact with soil, is going to help me to minimize that phosphorus loss to some extent. But we have to make this decision based on the field and what you know about it and what weather you see coming. It's just not all the time. So we started thinking this is kind of a lose-lose. So friends down in Arkansas, I like to tell the story. I don't know if it's true or not, but I don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. That was a joke. The guys down there from Arkansas, I like to say they got a welder, a junked white no-till planter, and a case of beer and came up with this thing. I know about the welder and the white no-till planter. I threw the beer in because it just makes it sound better. They took a white no-till planter and slapped it on this thing with some augers and basically made something that would inject poultry litter in the soil. The real winner here to me is that you get greater accuracy and precision and rate. Again, back to nitrogen management and the value of my litter. If I know what I'm putting down, I can better measure my economics. And I can turn this thing down to a 1/4 ton per acre and go, and it's a 1/4 ton per acre. I could turn it up to 2 to 4 tons per acre. I know I got 2 to 4 tons per acre, whatever I set it at. But what they delivered us, here's poultry litter pellets. Works great. I started this work when I was here at Maryland. Some people in this room, I ran it on your farms, I believe. Works great there when we put poultry litter in it, these augers would tunnel out. That auger is passing the litter from the back under all the litter out the front, squeezing moisture out of it and creates a tunnel, and then it just stops feeding. Won't work in practice. So Gene, who's here this week, started working on this thing. He doesn't drink beer, so it was bourbon, a welder, and this unit. And we started fooling with it. We've modified it now that we have a design that works. So with this subsurfer, I have a unit in Kentucky, been fully modified, and will apply litter until the cows come home. Works fine. I still wouldn't recommend it for a farmer because of the cost, and the weight, and the time of doing it. If your resource concern is nitrogen conservation and you value that I'm going to minimize runoff, then yes, go ahead and get one. It'll cost you $50,000. I'll give you the plans for the $50,000 of add-ons. At the end of the day with $100,000, if those resource concerns are your objective, $100,000 will get you there. But that's a tough sell, right? I see everyone shaking their heads. So we're working with some engineers out in Oklahoma. Got some guys in Kentucky on board now, trying to come up with a more practical solution. believe it or not, using air. We looked at a seeder that uses pneumatics, a planter. I said, can we blow this poultry litter in the ground? Well, it turns out, the engineers will all tell you, I can do whatever you want, Josh. I go to engineers all the time. Can you do this? Yes or no question. It's never a yes or no answer with an engineer. They always say, how much horsepower and how much money are you willing to give me? Right? And if you're willing to spend $10,000, we can blow poultry litter across this room now. There are a lot of design challenges with the airlock. You have to have an airlock, right, so that when you're pushing air into that litter, the air doesn't go out the tank. It goes down the tube. So we're working on, in a couple years, we've got the prototype now to do some back of the tailgate type testing. I'm hoping in 3 to 5 years we'll have a unit with fold-out booms that can be scaled to whatever width you've got the horsepower to pull, and we'll inject using a fan to blow that litter. Pretty cool stuff. Because of what I'm about to show you, I'm still excited about getting this to production scale. Even if dumb old MDA won't make you all incorporate the litter, which would force everyone to buy my unit, I'd make $1 billion. No, we're not patenting anything on it. So when it first came out, Pennsylvania, they did some work, put down 4 tons of litter, no side dress. Let's be down on the responsive side of the curve. We're nitrogen limited. Just see how much more nitrogen we're getting. We're getting 40 bushels more nitrogen at 4 tons per acre. So when I put it in the soil, I don't have any of that ammonia volatilization. Remember the nitrogen cycle? No ammonia volatilization. I'm getting more nitrogen into my plant. This right here is on the eastern shore of Maryland. That's a wheat cover crop. It'll run through it. People always ask, well, it'll run through just about anything. So we did this down at the University of Delaware for 2 years. We said, oh, wait a minute. Now that we're injecting, we have some other options. Remember I said the 4th R, source. We don't have anything for poultry litter to manipulate the source. And remember, I'm applying that poultry litter. It's all going down as some sort of ammonia nitrogen. I don't have nitrate in it to begin with. And in Maryland, you're not allowed to apply poultry litter before March 1st, correct? And I started thinking, man, I could move the poultry litter to more farms, which if you heard Dwight's talk this morning, we've got to move the litter around to more farms if I give people more time to apply it. If I allow them to apply January 1st or December 1st, I've got a bigger window, and I'm not doing it when I'm time crunched with planting, so maybe these grain farmers will take some more litter. And the reason we only allow March 1st application is nitrate leaching that occurs between March 1st and when the corn gets up and going in June. But if I can stop that, maybe they'll let us apply on January 1st. Nitropyrene, commercial name, N-Serve, well, what we used was Instinct. It's a Dow product that's been around for a long time. N-Serve was originally developed, and you guys back in the day used anhydrous. When you put ammonium anhydrous in the ground, N-Serve keeps it as ammonia over the winter, so it's still there in the spring. You know, out in Iowa, all their nitrogen goes down the fall as ammonia. They put this nitropyrene in it, and it protects it from nitrification. Remember the nitrogen cycle? So now this breaks nitrification and keeps it as ammonia, stay in the soil. And because it treats the soil, it won't work with the spreader. But with the injector, we put a starter fertilizer rig on that injector. It's just a planter. So we put a starter fertilizer rig, and we're dribbling the nitropyrene in behind the opening discs to treat the soil. Let's see if it works. We did some lab studies. In the lab studies, nitropyrene works better with poultry litter than it does fertilizer. Not sure why. The chemists at Dow, who I have talked to, think it's because the organic matter in the poultry litter actually attaches to the nitropyrene and protects it. We expected in the lab to get about a week of control. We got 8 weeks of control at 75 degrees Fahrenheit at 70% of field capacity moisture. Warm, wet soil where we should have had 2 or 3 days of activity, we had 8 weeks of activity. Crazy. So we moved to the field. We put out 90 pounds of nitrogen, either as injected with nitropyrene, surface applied normal litter, or surface applied UAN. Side dress nitrogen at V6 at 0, 45, 90, or 135 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So manure on the surface, manure in the ground with nitropyrene, fertilizer dribbled on the surface. Irrigated it, came back at V6 and side dressed it to see what our nitrogen response was. We did include a 0N check with nothing at pre-plant and a high pre-plant with no side dress at 270 pounds of N per acre. This is just all our calculations of how we got at plain available N. We had slightly different amounts of litter because surface applied got higher. We actually put more litter on the surface applied to account for the volatilization, right? The way Maryland does plain available calcs. This is the data all in one shot. It's a little hard to read. I'm going to move past that. But in brief, the orange and gray line are fertilizer and surface litter. The blue line is injected with nitropyrene. We did not expect this. We thought we had enough side dress rates that eventually this would catch up. It didn't. What's that mean? It means before V6 in surface applied poultry litter or fertilizer, the yield ceiling was set lower. Our potential yield at the end of the season could never catch up to the injected with nitropyrene. Why? Wet spring, barely turned on the irrigation, denitrification or nitrate leaching is going to occur out of the root zone. Before V6, never visual symptoms, but we had more nitrogen available and they injected with nitropyrene to that plant. Ammoniacal nitrogen. So when the rain stopped, soil dried out, there was nitrogen there from the injectant ready to go. With the surface applied, it would have taken a little bit more for that organic end to start releasing and moving back down into the root zone. So just the two litters. Surface is orange, blue is injected. I can look at it this way. If I take the highest yield from the surface applied, what was the rate to get that and what was the rate to get it with the injected? 245 bushels to the acres where we matched out with surface applied litter. I got that with 42 pounds of side dress N. Took me 126 pounds of side dress N to do it with the surface apply. Massive nitrogen use efficiency gains. Can look at it the other way. I just want to maximize yield. 16 bushel yield benefit at the highest yield for the injected. Yield side dressed at 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Normal litter 243 bushels per acre. Inject it and treat it 259 bushels per acre. So we're really excited about the nitrogen use efficiency gains because injecting with nitropyrene, I'm converting much more nitrogen into the plant for my litter. And what did I say at the beginning? The economic value of your poultry litter is its nitrogen. So the more nitrogen I use out of the litter, the more that litter is worth to me. And this is some of the stuff Jordan will cover tomorrow morning. Field storage of poultry litter, this isn't really a big deal to folks here so much because of some of the regs. But interestingly enough, the regs are actually tighter in Kentucky on this because the only thing that we really regulate in Kentucky, the only way the poop police show up at your door to find you is if your neighbors complain about the smell. And this was an uphill battle and we never won it with EPA, but we won it at the state level. And it was the one time I think Maryland Department of the Environment, actually we really agreed on this when we showed them the data. It's a photo from Greg Benford, some large pile studies that he did. If you place it high and dry, conically shaped, get rid of those flat spots or humps, keep the area around the pile clean, that crust is going to protect that litter and you're going to lose very little N and P. The salt accumulation under that pile can inhibit plant growth. That's, just something you've got to deal with. So in Kentucky, they don't let you field store it, right, because of the smell and sitting there and the optics of it. So keep the optics good. We've all seen the piles that are like this, like the picture I showed earlier of water and mess. That's bad optics. You do that, and someone's going to fly a drone over your farm, and they're going to sue you, right? You're going to end up back in court. We've all seen that happen, right? That happens in Maryland, right? But it's very simple math. Runoff phosphorus is acres times inches of rain. If I have 100 tons of litter spread in the fall on a field, or 100 tons in one pile, which has more acres? The field where 100 tons is spread. It's inches of rain times acres. So if I spread it, it's worse for the environment than if I just leave it in the pile till the spring when I can get some crop growth and take that nitrogen up. It's very simple math. So field storage, protect that litter, get a high quality product by storing it properly, push it up as high as you can get it conically shaped. This is some of Benford's data from those large piles, and the end story here is from a 100-ton pile, you lose about 10 pounds of nitrogen. That's like nothing. And it's in the soil right below the pile. It doesn't go very deep, and so if you get a crop on there and till it up with a little deep tillage where it was, who cares about that 10 pounds? You're going to lose far more spreading it at a bad time. Last point, the economic, I broke a sweat, I got to stop. I can't sweat. That's not good. I'm wearing a sport coat, right? That indicates I shouldn't be sweating. It's not that kind of job. I'm joking. The economic value of poultry litter tool. So if you Google Jordan Shockley, you're going to get somebody's wedding pictures. I tried it. It's the first hit. Go to the second hit. Google Jordan Shockley and put in poultry litter. And you'll get these two calculators that he developed with me and Edwin cheering him on and helping to some extent that do the economic value of the poultry litter. We've done it for hay, pasture, and silage, and a separate one for grain crops because the economics are different. He's going to spend all day tomorrow talking about it, but I just want to get you excited about it. You can use your numbers for soil test, what you're paying for fertilizer. You could put in your manure testing value. You could put it in the timing of application, a lot of different things, and it's going to tell you per ton what you should pay for that poultry litter. And if it's your poultry litter and you run this, and your per acre cost is in the red because your phosphorus levels, you have no phosphorus value. Your potassium value is no potassium value. Nitrogen is not enough to pay for the spreading cost. Then sell it, and you know exactly what it's worth to you. If you're buying litter, run the tool, and you know what you should be paying. And if it's cheaper to go fertilizer, go fertilizer. Do what is economically most beneficial to your operation is the point here, and use good data. And even if you don't have a poultry litter analysis, which everyone here does because we're in the Chesapeake Bay, but in Kentucky they don't, Edwin supplied about 700 manure samples, right, Edwin? 700? And Jordan, because he's an economist and good at math, which I'm not, he can run these probability risk functions, and it's like, I don't have a manure test. Here's what I'm paying for the litter. It'll tell you whether you have a 20% chance you're overpaying or a 90% chance you're overpaying. It'll just tell you the probability, and then you make the decision. Say, I'm fine. There's a 20% risk I'm overpaying. I'm all in because there's an 80% chance that I'm not. But if it says there's an 80% chance you're overpaying, think about fertilizer. I'm pretty excited about this tool. So in summary, simple stuff. Know what you're using. Test the manure. Everybody's doing that. Calibrate your spreader. Is it worth the price? Pencil it out. And proper field storage is far better than applying at the wrong time of year. With that, if you like to twit, I'm on Twitter, but I don't twit much, but it's there. There's my email address. And with that, I've got 5 minutes for questions. Questions, come on. The question is, PSNTs used to run them all the time. Tissue tests took off. People choose the path of least resistance. It's just human nature. The tissue test is an absolute waste of money. If you say, Josh, should I tissue test or do nothing? Do nothing. Save your money, spend it on beer. You'll be happier in the end. Honestly. The tissue test of V4 is an absolute waste of money. And I know people are going to be angry at me because consultants, I'm there with you. You make money off running tests. Charge them for the PSNT. Because it's a test that works if you have uncertainty. Part of the reason we see a decline is real. As we use less manure per acre, the uncertainty starts to go away. When we were applying 6 tons per acre of manure, we weren't quite sure if we still had to side dress. Now we look at it and go, 2 tons per acre, I know I have to side dress. So part of that is real. Every once in a while it helps to check a couple fields if you have funky weather to see what's happening though. So I really, as consultants, I believe your business should be making your farmers profitable so that you're profitable, right? Am I agreed, those in the private sector? And this is a test that will help your farmers be more profitable. Maybe you don't do it on all the fields. Sample one field really good with a lot of samples. And it gives you a little more confidence in how's the weather treated you so far. And that's all I can say. I mean, the tissue test at V4 is a waste of money. And you're wasting your clients' money. It just makes us feel good. I can give you answers. I can make up numbers, and that makes us feel good. This is why the university gets penalized. Because when you ask Josh McGrath a question, what's my answer always going to be? It depends. And people don't like that. I'm paying you $50 an hour to tell me 120 pounds of nitrogen per acre. End of story. Now, hell, you don't even know if you're getting 120 pounds to the acre out of a sprayer. You ever looked at nozzle by nozzle variability? The world is variable. And people have trouble with that.
When y'all doing those calibration tests, y'all come back and check your overlap and all that good stuff?
For the poultry litter? So, question. When we did the calibration study for our injector, that's the study you're talking about, did we make sure we weren't overlapping, that we were getting the rate we thought we got? Yes. Highly replicated, so if we did mess up, we've got other reps. But we used our injector to apply. And we used our guidance system to make sure our guidance system was Sean driving the tractor with someone out there with a flag. No, but we use the injector to apply, which is going to put it down.
Yeah, I'm talking about the spread. Spread.
For the study that I showed, though. That's what that
Overlap with the spreader, not
The injector.
on the fan.
we didn't use a spreader.
I know you didn't. Some of your older stuff there where you're
Talking
telling
about
people
calibrating.
calibrate.
Oh, I thought you were asking about the nitrogen injector. Okay, how did we calibrate to look at overlap and all that stuff when we were doing the studies? So we put out those
Right.
pans, and then you plot. That's right. You make the turn. So I usually put 3 passes worth of pans out, and I run on the setters that I start where I think I'm going to go, and I make up, back, up, right? And I look at a chart of how my overlap is, and then I start widening or narrowing my centers to try and get it as even between the pans as possible. And you just got to look at the data, pencil it out on the tailgate, and make another pass at 20 feet instead of 30 feet. And yeah, make one pass and you're done, right? Yeah. Well, you can do it once and look at it and it gives you an idea because you know exactly what your spreader's doing. Usually, what you see is this: low, high, low. You actually get an M shape. One more minute. Time for one really bad question or good question. Nothing from MDA? Yes, sir.
I guess in the tissue test, does that hold true for like chlorophyll meter, the green seeker, or something like that?
Totally different.
Totally different.
Totally different. It's not a tissue test. You're not looking at nitrogen concentration, and they require a reference strip. You're looking at a relative index, so there's other calculations that come in to play, which we could talk more about. But with a chlorophyll meter or a green seeker handheld, you should have a reference strip, and you should be running it through an equation that converts it into a normalized index. It's not just this, how many milligrams per kilogram of nitrogen in the tissue. It'll be a good talk for next year.
So if you don't have the calibration strip, does it go back to your other comment about the...
If you don't have the calibration strip, yes, then you don't know where you're at. You have to have that reference strip. All right, thank you very much.
Don't forget Pennsylvania to sign up.